All right, we are awaiting President Trump's highly anticipated announcement on his pick to replace Justice Anthony Kennedy on the Supreme Court. As we've been reporting, the president says he has narrowed down his list to just 4 federal appeal court judges. Sources tell CBS News that list includes Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, Raymond Ketledge, and Thomas Hardiman. Joining us from Washington is CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford to take us through this. Good to see you, Jan.
Thanks. It's an exciting day here.
It is an exciting day.
Yeah, it's obviously, this decision will have an enormous impact on American law, everyday life for a generation or more. And I mean, the president has really got it narrowed down to these 4. He's probably made his decision by now, but he's saying that it's not going to leak. They're going to have to wait until 9 o'clock tonight to find out. And it didn't leak last time. We heard, with America, that he had selected Neil Gorsuch. So we may not know until tonight.
Okay, so we've got an idea, at least with 4. Let's sort of break it down. We were hearing that the Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, has reportedly put a little bit of outside pressure on the president. He's got 2 nominees that he really likes, Raymond Ketledge and Thomas Hardiman. What do you have to say about these 2? Apparently, according to the reporting, the feeling is that there are no obvious obstacles with them when it comes to being confirmed.
Well, I mean, I think the Majority Leader likes Judge Kavanaugh and Judge Barrett as well. And for his calculations, he's looking at who can he get confirmed in that Senate so that the nominee is on the bench the first Monday in October. He has flagged for the White House that, Kavanaugh is a very experienced federal judge who's worked in the Bush White House, worked for independent counsel Ken Starr. He have a lot more documents they're going to have to go through, so his confirmation could take longer. Amy Barrett has written and talked a lot about social issues and abortion rights that have kind of raised some red flags among some of those moderate Republicans on Capitol Hill. So that might be a little tricky. So if you're looking for like a slam dunk, let's get this done and have it in place, yeah, I mean, Ketledge and Hardiman might be easier to get done more quickly. But the argument to the White House and why I think the Majority Leader is acutely aware of this. The president is still in the Republican Party that controls the U.S. Senate right now. So, this is not a time, the argument goes, that he needs to be, kind of acting like he's in some bear market. I mean, like swing for the fences. You've got control of the Senate. He's flying high. So now is the time kind of to go bold. And that's why I think you're still seeing a lot of momentum for Judge Kavanaugh, who's got all the he basically checks off all the boxes. He's got the elite qualifications the president wants, Yale College, Yale Law School, clerk for Justice Kennedy. He's on that prestigious D.C. circuit, which is kind of a pipeline to the Supreme Court. And he's seen as someone who would be a real intellectual force as a conservative legal thinker on the court, someone who could really go head-to-head with like a Justice Kagan, and really bring that intellectual fire to bear. So I'm still feeling that there is quite a lot of support for him, despite what is a very extensive record. So, I guess we'll just have to see how that shakes out.
Jan, I'm curious, something you just mentioned there, I think that a lot of people have expressed some interest in as well, which is the qualifications that the president is looking for when it comes to nominating a Supreme Court justice. You mentioned the elite universities, something that's been reported the president is very interested in. Just describe for our viewers what your experience is in watching this president nominate Supreme Court justices has been versus some other presidents, like perhaps President Obama or President Bush, and even going back as far as President Reagan.
Well, I think on the Supreme Court picks and on judges in general, whether it's for the federal district courts or the federal courts of appeals, President Trump in this area has been a conventional Republican president. The nominees that we're talking about now are the same nominees that a Republican president would have picked, whether it was, back in the day, a Mitt Romney or, a Bush. I mean, these are like the most qualified conservative legal thinkers out there. I mean, this list, you're not going to argue over their qualifications. These are rock stars in the conservative legal world. And so, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2. So he's kind of, these are all pretty conventional picks. And what he's looking for, and what a lot of presidents, they look at credentials. Did someone go to the Ivy League? That's why, for example, on this Supreme Court right now, every justice went to the Ivy League. Tom Hardiman and Amy Barrett would be the only justices on the Supreme Court right now who are outside the Ivy League. They both went to Notre Dame. Hardiman went to Georgetown, and she went to Notre Dame Law School. I mean, so, you know, that would be some diversity on the court. I mean, the president is looking for justices, as all presidents do, that they think will stay true to their legal philosophy once they get on the Supreme Court. Republican nominees in the past have had a tendency to get up on the Supreme Court, move to Washington, you know, start going to the thinking goes Georgetown cocktail parties or, you know, law conferences in Switzerland, and then they start kind of drifting to the left. So that's something that a conservative Republican president would worry about. Are they going to make a nominee they think is conservative, but once they get on the Supreme Court, they become a liberal, like David Souter or Justice O'Connor, or even, you know, Justice Kennedy, who disappointed conservatives.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Jan, you know, there's been a lot of criticism recently that the courts have become, the Supreme Court has become way more political, that you can basically predict the way a lot of these justices are going to rule based on, you know, who appointed them, right?
Yeah.
Whether it was a Republican or a Democrat. But you've been watching the Supreme Court for a long time. What's your take on it? Is the court becoming more political?
I would say it's more political. I mean, I think the Supreme Court, and I mean, I've covered it now for what, 25 years. I mean, it's still one of the institutions in Washington where these are right now 8, 9, with Justice Kennedy's retirement, justices who are very engaged in an authentic struggle for the correct legal answer. And they all have different views and different ways of interpreting the Constitution, but I don't believe that they are guided by politics. I mean, they have at base a legal philosophy. It may be a conservative legal philosophy or a liberal legal philosophy, but they're not going in there and saying, you know, I'm a Democrat, so I'm going to vote this way, or I'm a Republican, so I'm going to vote this way. It sometimes looks that way, and I think there have been cases in the past that really made it look that way, like Bush versus Gore, when all the Democratic the so-called liberal justices were on the side of the Democrats and the so-called conservative justices were on the side of the Republicans. But by and large, I mean, I think this is a court that's really engaged in this struggle. And so now with this court, when you've kind of got this balance between 4-4 and a new justice coming on, the president has a real moment to turn the court to the right for a generation.
Yeah, indeed. Jan Crawford, thanks a lot. So, as we mentioned before, you can watch special live coverage of the Supreme Court announcement anchored by our Elaine Keano. That begins at 8:30 Eastern Time right here on CBSN.